System says we're live, I think. Let me just go out real quick and check. Yes, we are live. Okay, awesome. So, welcome. It is 6 o'clock here in the Ozarks. Welcome to Right
Yes,
Talk
we are live.
Wednesday.
Okay, awesome.
Oh,
So,
I gotta mute
welcome. It
something.
is 6 o'clock here in the Ozarks. Welcome to Right
Yes,
Talk
we are live.
Wednesday. Okay.
Oh dear.
So, welcome. It is 6 o'clock here in the Ozarks. Welcome to.
There we go. Sorry. All the tabs open at once. I changed my settings. So, let's try that again. Oh, what a day. It is 6 o'clock here in the Ozarks, and welcome to Right Talk Wednesday. I am your host, Kit Kilstow, and I am here, as always, with the office cat who cannot be ruled. So be prepared for anything if you are watching this. I am delighted, absolutely delighted today to speak with author Dharma Kelleher. She writes crime fiction that is just, it's a page turner. I read her book Turf Wars as a review copy. I love it, and I don't normally read like crime or thriller fiction, but it kept me going. Um, Absolutely amazing mix of characters, especially dealing with the transgender community and issues affecting the transgender community. But just even if you're a fan of, television shows that are just crime or thrillers, you're going to love her book. So let's just dive right in. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Kit, for having me. I really, really appreciate it. I'm really excited.
Well, I'm sure you can talk about your books much better than I can. So, why don't we start by having you tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit about yourself and your books?
Well, my tagline is I write crime thrillers where queer women kick ass. And I've got three series currently. I've got my first series was about a cisgender lesbian outlaw biker, so think Sons of Anarchy, but from a lesbian feminist point of view. Then I've got my longest running series, which is the Jigs Blue Bounty Hunter series, which is she's a professional bounty hunter. She also happens to be transgender, and in her spare time, she cosplays as Wonder Woman and Xena at comic book conventions. So she's a little quirky, but she's also pretty much a badass. And then my most recent series is my Avery Byrne Goth Vigilante series. And this is about a young transgender woman working as a tattoo artist. She's goth, and she's a bit of a vigilante, so. All three explore issues of social and criminal justice. They don't dwell a lot, only a few of my books dwell specifically on transgender issues, even though a lot of the main characters are trans. But sometimes I do dive deep into that issue, especially recently where we've had a lot of anti-trans violent and anti-trans legislation. So.
Yeah, and it was so refreshing. And I think with Turf Wars being my introduction to your work, it was so refreshing to read this book. And for those who aren't familiar with it, turf would be spelled TERF. And so many of my viewers and listeners are probably very familiar with that term and what that means. And it just I just found it lovely. You even mentioned your first series centering the feminist point of view with the bikers. I just found it very refreshing to center that. Is that something that you set out to do with your work, or as you said, did it come about naturally?
When I first got serious about my writing, I was at the time I was a biker. I've since retired my helmet, and I was a member of a all women's biker group, And I loved Sons of Anarchy, but it was distinctly left out. Where are the women? Except as the old ladies and such. And so I wanted to write a feminist biker uh, book or series, as it turned out. And after the first two books were published by one of the big five publishers, I decided I wanted to start writing books with a trans main character. Not about transitioning or makeup or sex or it just crime thrillers, but from a trans point of view, since I'm also transgender. And of course, all the tradition publishers like, well, we already published a trans book this year. Oh, okay. I didn't know there was a limit. So I decided to go indie at that point, and I've published about a dozen or so. It'll be 13 books coming on um, uh, this June.
Wow, that's great. And I I'm not surprised to hear you say that you went indie because I'm finding more and more authors. You know, I went indie about 10 years ago with my romance, and although that's I no longer write romance, but the I went indie because of the creativity. You know, that just kills me that they say, "Oh, I published a transgender book," and it's like, "Oh, you're not aware that there could be more than one."
Exactly. We've got a quota. We've met the quota. We're done.
Yeah. And when
You
you're
know, go
oh,
ahead. Go ahead.
I just was gonna say, and when you're indie, you can do whatever you want.
Exactly. I love the creative control. With if I had stayed on the traditional publishing path, I would have had to stop that series at two books and try something else. And I didn't want to do that. I had more books that I wanted to write in a series, and I've had that main character show up in other books in my other series. So and I can do that because I'm in charge. I get to make the decisions, and I get to control cover art because I hated the cover art for the first two books that were published. And I love the creative controls that it gives me.
There's nothing worse than trying to promote a book with a crappy cover.
Oh yeah, it was horrible.
Hmm. Yeah, I've been there. I I feel you. So for those who are watching us right now, welcome to our viewers, of course, on Twitch and YouTube where we stream. But you can see, I'll try to point my fingers the right way in the upper corner here. There is a cover of her next book, which comes out in June, if I'm remembering correctly, called A Plague of Grackles, which I just love the title and I love the cover. It is just so beautiful. Can you tell us a little bit about that book?
Yes, it is the third book in my Avery Byrne series. The first book was a conspiracy of ravens and a murder of crows. I couldn't resist doing that one. And then A Plague of Grackles. This one, like Turf Wars, deals a little bit more heavily with the transgender issue, transgender rights and everything, and transgender violence. And so basically, in this one, um, the main character, Avery Byrne, she's noticed that there's been a lot of seemingly unrelated attacks on her local trans community, and she suspects that they're somehow connected. And the police are like, "Oh no, there's no connection. We'll look into it." And she's not satisfied with that answer, so she and her girlfriend start digging into things. And her girlfriend runs a spy shop, so they sell all kinds of cameras and spy gear and parabolic microphones and all kinds of fun toys. And so between the two of them, they dive into this, finding out who's behind all this violence. And it gets pretty rough. I don't write cozies, but it dives into Avery's personal history. When she came out, when she was a teenager, she was kicked out of the house, so she was a homeless teen for many years. and so she's very street smart. She's a survivor, and she's very much eye for an eye. So she's kind of petite, but she holds her own.
Well, it sounds amazing, and I really urge, no matter when you're listening to or watching this, to, head over to our show notes website and pre-order or order the book. You will not be disappointed. And I say this as somebody who does read and write cozies. So I normally, try to keep my reading on the lighter side, but yeah, it's gripping action, but it's not gratuitous action, I think is a good way to put it.
I try not to make it gratuitous. I do a lot of research, so when I'm talking about things like police procedures or weaponry or even injuries, I try to get it as realistic and accurate as possible. So, but because we're dealing with very dark subjects anyway. And I love cozies. I love to read cozies. They're kind of like my palate cleansers between the darker stuff. So it's like, okay, I've read enough thrillers. I need to read a cozy, cats and coffee shops and all that stuff. I love them. It's not that one is better than the other. They're both great for me. And I also read romance and everything else because I get ideas from other places. It's like, hey, I read something in a romance novel, like, hey, I like the dynamic between these two characters. I wonder if I could do something like that in my next book. Yeah.
I think it's important to refill the creative well like that.
Absolutely. Get outside of your comfort zone and read something different.
Mm-hmm. So I did want to ask about the research, because there are some genres that I feel like are more research heavy, and mystery, crime, thriller, that genre to me seems that it's much more research heavy than like the cozy fantasy that I write.
Right, right. Well, part of it is that readers will call you out if you get something wrong. And there's the classic mistake that a number of well-respected traditional published authors have made, like a Glock with a safety. Well, the safety on a Glock is on the trigger, so it's not really a safety, or a safety on a revolver. Most revolvers don't have safeties either. And so when you make these mistakes, readers who know more than you do about things like that will point them out to you. They'll say, "Oh, this isn't realistic." And a lot of things, if I can't research it myself, I'll ask friends. Like if it's a police procedural issue, I've got friends who are retired law enforcement, and I'll ask them, "Hey, does this scenario sound realistic? Would it happen a different way?" Or if I've got a legal question, like this happens in a courtroom setting, I've got lawyer friends who would advise me on that. That way, I won't get everything right, and there will certainly be differences of opinion. There are certainly different procedures in different municipalities or whatever, but you try to get it as close as you can.
Sure, sure. Well, that makes sense too. I know, talking with like Regency authors, the
Mm-hmm.
readers are vicious when you get something
Oh,
wrong.
yeah. This word wasn't used at this time period or something like that. That's why I don't write historical, because I would screw that up.
I've done some, but it's more modern historical, and it's like alt
Hmm.
history, so it's like a fantasy world anyway.
Oh, I like
So yeah,
that.
yeah.
See, yeah. So then you can say, well, this is how it is in this alternative history. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, um, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a moment. So, do you alternate series then, since you have three series going?
yeah, I pretty much concluded the first series, the biker series, although Shay, who's the main character in that series, still shows up in my other books. She showed up in this new book that's coming out. Um, uh, But yeah, I kind of alternate. I wrote the first two books in the Every Burn series back to back, and then now I'm getting back to the Jinx Baloo Bounty Hunter series, and it's kind of like Homecoming. It's like, oh, what are these characters up to? And I'm reading kind of the latest, the most recent book in the series, just to reacquaint myself with the characters and what their quirks were and everything. Because I forget, I forget characters' names. I forget their the things that make them unique and interesting on the page. So, and I keep a story Bible, which is kind of like a database of relevant information about the different characters, especially as they've evolved over the books. But still, I have to go back and reread and say, oh, okay, yeah, I forgot that this character tends to use this particular phrase or this particular word a lot. Or they referred to this other character in this certain way. So it helps.
So I want to throw the tip out there to any authors who might be listening or watching this. If you're gonna write more than one book, keep a story or a series Bible or a world Bible if you're doing fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I am in the process of rebranding and sending out my fantasy again. Also, a fun tip for authors: if you discover that you're trans later in life, don't use your real first name as your pen name, because then you have to change all of your books. Which is what I'm in the middle of doing right now.
Yeah,
But
I think I don't know. I can't remember if Mel Cooper ran into that with hers or not. I know she writes her fiction under M.D. Cooper, so hopefully she didn't have to run into too many problems with that. But yeah, fortunately, I transitioned really early in life, so it hasn't been an issue.
yeah, yeah, it was kind of startling, and I went, "Oh, wait a minute, I got to do this." Yeah. Um, but with the series Bible, I think it is so important because I'm going through and it's like, oh yeah, I didn't realize so and so showed up in this book, or
Right?
oh, I said, this happened and this hasn't happened yet, and there's all sorts of
Mm-hmm.
things. So it sounds like you ran into that too a little bit, but maybe not so much.
Yeah, I first noticed it when my first book was getting edited by Alibi, which was my first publisher. They're an imprint of Random House. And there were some questions that came up about ages, like in years between certain events happening, because there were some flashback scenes and things like that. And I was just playing it off the cuff, fast and loose. Like, oh, I guess it would be 8 years and not 7 years and all this stuff. And so I eventually made a series Bible on Scrivener, which is where I write as well. I created a separate file in Scrivener for each of my series, and it has sheets on characters. And so, because I write thrillers, I'll keep track of weapons that they use or vehicles that they have. Um, there's a timeline of when different things happened in their lives. So if I need to refer back to, okay, this happened 6 years ago, not 7 years ago, or 10 years ago, whatever, I've got that information. And it's a lot of work to keep up every time I put out a new book. But I've got some tools in place that make it a little bit easier. Like there's a tool that will scan a manuscript for all proper nouns. And then I can take that list of proper nouns and go through the manuscript and see every time that name is mentioned, whether it's a place or a person or an organization, and make notes of any relevant data that I need to keep track of.
I just learned something new about Scrivener. I mean, wow, that sounds awesomely helpful.
Now, Scrivener isn't the one that scans the manuscript.
Oh,
This
okay.
is a separate tool. This is there's a database, or there's a website out there, and you make a small donation and everything like that. But this guy's been running it for several years now, and it's great. I mean, it just cuts down on the time it takes to keep everything updated.
Yeah, definitely. I know I don't use Scrivener to its fullest capacity, which, it's an amazing tool and it is so powerful. And
It is. It is. I like that I can
get the bird's eye view of, the outline and everything like that, because versus when I was working in Word. And it just makes life so much easier. I can go for a walk in the morning for an hour, and I can dictate into Scrivener into my phone, and it needs a lot of cleaning up afterwards. It's not like Dragon Naturally Speaking, but I get 1,000 words or more in a walk.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I totally am not using it to its fullest capacity. uh, so that the fact that you mentioned the outline feature, do you know kind of the beats of your story before you get started, or do they unfold naturally because you kind of have a feel for the genre and your characters?
It's a little bit of both. I work off of a 4-act structure basically, and right now I'm kind of still in the outline early draft phase of my next Jinx novel. So I'll section off 4 sections, 4 acts, and I know that okay, Act 1 is where I'm introducing the problem, the main characters, whatnot, and then just the basic 4-act structure, and then I'll do some brainstorming. I'll create a sheet in Scrivener, and it'll be my brainstorming, and I'm just kind of free writing. It's like okay, Jinx goes off and she's looking for this fugitive, and she goes to their house and this happens, and so I just spitballing, and nothing is set in stone. And then after I've done that a few times, I may have like a few different brainstorming documents in Scrivener in that project, and then I'll go back and I'll kind of formulate an outline. So I get the basic scene beats of where I want to take it, and then I'll create scenes. I'll outline scenes in Scrivener. So I'll create a separate sheet for each scene, and then I start doing the drafting phase. And I'm not married to the outline. I learned after about a dozen novels that I'll get about halfway through, and I'm like, oh, this whole ending in the 3rd act is not working. I'm gonna have to do something else, or I'm running too fast. I need to fill it out a little bit. Need a little bit more try-fail cycles or something. And so my process is very organic. I do plot, but I'm not married to the plot, so I'm sort of a plantser between a pantser and a plotter.
I feel like a lot of us authors who have been writing for a long time kind of get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Because I used to be a very, very type A plotter. Like, this is the plot, don't you dare go off of it. And after
Mm-hmm.
quite a few of those characters are going, no, we're not, we're going to go this way. Then it's
Yeah.
like, okay, this needs to change. And so, yeah, I'm more of a pantser, but I know kind of where I'm going 2 to 3 steps ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't plot very far ahead, but I know kind of where I'm headed.
Yeah, I pay really most of the attention to where one act turns into another. So the midpoint of the story, where everything turns upside down. Okay, how am I going to turn this story upside down? Does Jinx become uh, pursued by whoever she's been going after, or is there a plot twist that suddenly she realizes that everything that she thought she knew she doesn't, or how am I going to turn this upside down? Because that's the fun,
Mm-hmm.
is throwing in the plot twist, because readers enjoy that. They're like, oh, I didn't see that coming. Because and that's why I don't mind changing my outline, because oh, I didn't see that coming either. So I'll just throw something in and like out of left field, and the readers just eat it up.
That's the fun. I mean, that
It is. It is.
yeah.
That's why I don't get too bored in the drafting phase, even if I've outlined the whole damn thing, because I always get surprises, and the person I thought was the bad guy may not be the bad guy, and it's like suddenly it's like, oh, wait a minute, what if it's this other person?
So you're trying to figure out the mystery along with Jinx, and
Exactly, absolutely. That's the fun part of it, you know? And if I'm feeling like everything's too predictable, I'm like, okay, who's the least likely suspect or whatever, or what can I pull out of a hat that just totally throws everything in the story upside down? That's the fun of it.
definitely, definitely. Well, I have had fun talking to you. Our time is almost coming to a close.
I've had a blast too.
Great.
Gone
Um,
too fast.
yeah. Why don't you let our viewers and listeners know where to find more information about you and your books? And these will also be in the show notes. So if they're driving or something and can't write it down, it's all okay.
Sure. The best place to find me is on my website. It's dharmakelleher.com. And there'll be a link because everybody forgets the H's in both of my names. I'm also on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Threads. I'm not on Twitter anymore. I'm sometimes on TikTok, but not very often. I'm still kind of getting the hang of the whole video thing, so. But yeah, and that's mostly where you can find me.
Great. And it looks like your books are wide, so you're on Amazon and all major retailers.
Yes, yes, all major retailers, exactly.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really
Thank you,
appreciate.
Kit.
You're so welcome. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for watching and listening to Right Talk Wednesday. We will be back, hopefully, with some new interviews here soon.